Hey, everybody, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby, and of course, we talk to people who are going to help small, medium-sized nonprofits figure out their stuff. One of the things that I think our small, medium-sized nonprofit friends can't figure out, and it's the most difficult thing in the world, is our board of directors. What on earth are they thinking sometimes? What on earth are we doing with them sometimes? I'm really glad that we got our guest today, who's going to help us figure out a perspective, not from you, but from your boards. And it's something that I think we don't spend enough time talking about and thinking about. It's going to be a great episode today. So I'd like to introduce Mark Buzan, who's the founder of the Society of Nonprofit Board Directors and actually the host of an upcoming event, the Nonprofit Board Summit. Mark, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you, Patrick. Such an honor to be with you.
It's going to be a great show today because it is talking about an angle that I don't think we as the nonprofit executives or we as the nonprofit fundraisers acknowledge or talk about, whether we're allowed to or whether we just don't take it upon ourselves to do that. And that is from the perspective of the board director. But before we get into that, somebody's kind of scrolling through and they're like, I love this topic. I'm really interested, but I don't know who Mark is. So let's start at the start, 5,000-foot view, kind of who you are, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. As you indicated, there's quite a story behind my past, frankly, as that led me to wanting to really understand board directors' perspectives and found the Society of Nonprofit Board Directors. So I've spent the better part of 20 odd years working in non-for-profit organizations, and after getting my start in career, I worked for a member of Parliament up here in Canada, and where I started off really going through things was first off doing the natural progression after working on Parliament. You did a little lobby in the government relations, and I like to joke it was only the nonprofits or the associations would hire us poor hacks, and so I got exposed to a lot of interesting perspectives. First, in that very, very first role that I left, I kind of quote if people didn't see me, they're doing the air quotes. My first real job after leaving Parliament was working for a very small industry association where it was literally just myself and the executive director. And I was employee number 2 in this they'd ever had in this organization. So I was following him very in-depthly in his relationship that he had with the board itself. And sometimes it could be very precarious. Sometimes there's a lot of things. It was just a very interesting dynamic, and seeing very much from their perspective of where things going, and then advancing on to a variety of different roles as an independent, and then up to being an independent consultant, and then eventually coming back as an executive director, president, CEO. So I spent the better part of that in public policy, and then later with non-for-profits, particularly my background. Although I've got a lot of charitable experience, it's been mostly on the association side of the nonprofit family. And often, I think I'm guilty of this. I'm very guilty of this. I kind of think of myself as a reformed executive director. I saw one side of the story.
Yeah,
I saw one side of the story, like this. I saw the staff side of things. We're in it every single day. This is we live and we breathe. We're passionate about this. You get it. We let it come to the office. Foot up I get my cappuccino machine, and I'm at work. And I'm at work, and I'm doing this kind of stuff. And the board is kind of like would be, particularly I started finding this as I ascended to the top job, if you will, at one organization where I was the executive director. It started out fantastic, and everybody, the executive directors, they have what we call the honeymoon phase, where nothing can go possibly wrong.
Oh, and then that's the best. Isn't that the best phase, though?
It is the amazing thing, because the board, they take everything you say, they lap it up, and it's for somebody who's got an ego. In a minute, they have an ego, and like this was amazing. It's amazingly dangerous after a while. You start lapping it up, and then a year and a half later, 80% of my board changed. And that board didn't have the same familiarity with the issues and the reasons why I was hired like this. And I immediately went from hero to zero, Patrick, because I had a number of board members who literally you couldn't even breathe. And I'm not executive directors are probably rolling eyes. They can the micromanagers on this. And that drove me absolutely crazy.
Sure.
I left that organization and only to go into another one and find out, well, frankly, the exact opposite thing, where, as like quote Dr. Phil, is like you'd have to literally jump on the hood of their car to get their attention kind of on some really, really big issues. Now, ultimately, because of my knowledge and pondering on this very much, I kept on saying, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we got to do this. And that just ended up just cheesing them off, frankly. And well, let's just say, I like to say, is I ended up on the wrong end of an argument on this. Now, initially, what happened after that experience was, of course, you're the shock, the awe, your disappointment. What are you going to do? And inevitably, you go out to people that you respect, and you saying, this is what happened, and how do we get around this? And what one of them told me, there's this gentleman up here in Canada whom I respect enormously. He's really well known in terms of HR placements for CEOs, and that's Jack Shannon. I asked him a little bit about what happens. And he said very calmly, he says, Mark, I don't think you're cut out to be an executive director.
Interesting.
Ouch. He says, you're far too entrepreneurial for this. So I because I respect Jack, I said, thank you, Jack. And he says you could go off and do your own thing and manage and work particularly with boards and that. Well, I hung up the phone and I said, that guy must be crazy. I'm not going to go off and do something like that. But after speaking with a number of people, particularly board directors, get their perspective, I said, you know what, maybe I've been missing, maybe there was something to this. After all, he wasn't so crazy after all. Maybe I should listen to him. And that led me down to a path, frankly, of from my own little journey, if you will, of, realizing, maybe in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. I missed that I didn't see that turn from their perspective of things. To getting a really, and fast forwarding a few years later, realizing, because I come from an association background, I'm a little bit more biased. I happen to believe that one of the best ways you can learn is from your peers. That's why through human history, we've had, guilds, societies. That used to be the way that you would learn a trade or whatever that made you from everybody else. I looked around and I said, well, just strictly from a business building perspective, but also from a more altruistic spirit, why do we keep on in nonprofits, keep on repeating the same damn problems all over again, over and over and over? Why do we keep on having the same dialogues and all these different dialogues about where boards go wrong like this? And it's usually I was quite amazed. A few things. One, if you look at a lot of the dialogue out there, it tends to be driven by former executive directors, consultants who've been executive directors. And I don't want to blast you because I'm one of them as well. But I found that really intuitive. Nobody ever bothered to ask, well, what about the other side of the coin here? Usually, isn't it true? And then in an argument or a disagreement, there's usually two sides to two different points of view. And that's why we have arbitrators to negotiate kind of things. It seemed to be that the voices of the executive directors, and I think this is largely because they're in it every single day. They do it all the time. They're dedicated to this. Whereas board directors, I say this is off the corner of their desk, right? This is not their full-time passionate thing. Most of them, if they get cheesed off, said, you know what, screw it, I'm out of here, buddy. And they don't lose anything out of it.
Right.
But the nonprofit sector, frankly, loses big when that happens.
It's funny that when you are a fundraiser, you're programmed to ask really good questions and listen to the donors, right? You're listening for their perspectives. You're trying to understand where they come from so that you can match whether it's a program or service or some sort of fundraising opportunity so that they feel really great about where they're coming from. And ironically, those who are helping run the organization that you're trying to raise money for, who can give the best direction, are the people that we're asking better questions and listening to the least. Yeah. Ironically, this is kind of where you're setting this up for, is that we never really come to a understanding from where the board is. Rather, we just assume that they're going to fit the mold. You never want to put, from a hiring standpoint, right? You go to an HR person. Yeah. You try to fit a square peg, round hole, doesn't work, right? Never works out. And yet, I think we do that a lot with our board members because we got to check boxes, right? So we've got a banker we need to check. Might not understand our folks. We don't do it. They're going to be in because they've got this as a background, and they become a background or an expertise rather than a person that we need to understand from a personal standpoint. Isn't that? That's funny.
The truth? Yeah, because that's but you know, I've yet to, in my many discussions, maybe one of these days, I'm after having spoken to these, I swear I'm going to say one of these days I'll do a formalized study on this, but everything I've been doing is really just, I'm giving anecdotal, having spoken on this. I've yet to met a single board director who says, I do this because I have a passion for doing the minutes, or I do this because I have a passion for hearing committee reports.
Right. Yep.
Nobody.
Consent agendas, man, I get out of the bed in the morning for those.
Yeah.
I'd love
Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Yet we keep on ramming that down their throats and like this. The reason why, and I challenge anybody who's going to go out and do this, is don't be content with what I call the motherhood statements. Oh, I want to give back or not like that. No, come on, cut the crap. Why are you really doing this?
Yeah.
Why are you really doing this? Everybody on planet Earth, a human being, this is a natural thing, does, as they say, from a psychological reason, does things for one of three reasons. Okay. Health, wealth, relationships. Okay. This, I think, you're not going to get wealthy from this. Not going to maybe get healthy from it. Maybe mentally, I don't know, but that's kind of dubious. That's kind of dubious, frankly. Yeah. It's on the relationship side of things. And part of relationships is your own feeling about yourself, about feeling good about yourself. Don't you feel you want, everybody wants to be around somebody who makes them feel good about themselves, really. And where am I going with this is when I really push them and I says, come on, you really seriously, you take time away from your friends, your family, your hobbies, your business, your career. Surely you got something better to do with your life than sit around a boring boardroom and look at financial reports, committee reports, and eat stale donuts and drink coffee on a Saturday, all of your Saturday, right? Surely you got this. What gives? Come on, really. And after the chuckling's done like this, because I put it a little bit light to kind of open it up there, they say, you know what? I feel because I want to feel I'm part of something bigger than myself. Yeah. I want to feel like I've made a mark, I've left a legacy, I've made an impact. And my little contribution has been part of that.
It's the same, that's the same answer that donors give. The same answers that donors give. And we don't treat our board members the way that we treat our donors because they're part of the team. We've got our horse blinders on, they got a mission to do, and you got a job to do. Well, if you're not going to do that, what's the turnover rate? What's the rate of people who are going to develop an ire for what your ideas are because you're not investing the time to have them feel like they came up with it as well? The same way that you have a donor reach out and going to give you $1,000, for example, and you reach out and say your impact for that $1,000 to develop this and help us promote this and did this with our clients or those that we serve. Are you doing that with your donors or with your board members to say the hours that you put in here developed this program that helped this many individuals? Did you personalize it? Or do you just group it together and then as a collective and it's part of a line item that's either red, yellow, or green on a budget line that you just throw up there because you got to get through the motions in order to get this whatever task you have at a board meeting done?
Isn't that the truth? I mean, look, the dialogue I watch out there, I find sometimes honestly rather troubling. Honestly troubling about the viewpoints sometimes about if you read the Reddits, the subreddits, sometimes if you read the blogosphere about this, I'm not going to say, look, I'm personal witness to that where I can tell you where boards can go bad, that they can go bad. I'm not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
But there's two sides of the fence. There's two sides of the story here. And one of the things that is just so amazing, and you alluded to it there, is you only have to look on LinkedIn or elsewhere like this about the whole story about our culture is shifting, our corporate culture is shifting, about the importance of getting the right people into an organization, creating the right kind of a culture that's inclusive, that people feel right, that feel appreciated. And that's fantastic. That's great. We need that kind of work like this because that makes for a better workforce. Yet, the most important role, one of the most important advisory strategic roles, nothing.
Yeah.
Usually I personally, maybe it's out there, but all of the job descriptions, quote unquote job descriptions for board roles or volunteer roles it's a listing of everything that's going to be expected of you. And that's fine, to import that out, but you miss out a huge opportunity to be able to track that. We want as Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great says, that you want the level 5 leadership, those those type of people that really push it forward, they get it, they're in there. We do a piss poor job, pardon my language if I use this, of a sales job on this role.
Right.
There could be a potentially, saying, look, you're going to be part of something really big. Do you really want to have, and that's the call out I put to board directors to get involved, at least with the society and with our summit, is saying, look, do you really want to be content with just plodding along?
Yeah.
Or isn't your life much more meaningful when you said, you know what? I played a small part of that role and my ideas were taken forth on this and they were considered and move forward on this, or I was part of that dialogue to move this organization, this movement forward. That's what motivates people. That's what gets people really excited behind you, to be able to do all those other important listening there. We don't do anything about that to communicate that important check, or even the very least of it, doing a little check-in and say, Patrick, how's this working out for you?
Yeah. One of the things that I find fascinating, because I've experienced great board members, awful board members, and like everything in between, right? We all have. But they're people, they're humans, and you either get along with people and you don't. One of the things that I found interesting, and maybe people who are listening to this kind of can relate, is that if there's an executive director who's got a relationship with the board chair and maybe board or directors, but everybody underneath, maybe the fundraising person that doesn't have a relationship, I experienced where the expectations, because I wasn't the ED, was not to engage and have any relationship with board members outside of the board meeting, where I'm coming in and expected to do X, Y, and Z. And the minute that there was a friendly tone struck or a personal accord with one of the board members, that made our executive directors, sort of ears perk and go, whoa, 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 whoa. Not your role, not your duty is to sort of be a part of the friend circle. You're in a professional capacity here. Don't cross a line. And I think that's a curious thing that I'd love to ask you about, is what have you seen as an expectation? Is it the employee's role to understand and get to know some of the board members, or is it solely the executive director who's sort of puppet mastering sort of the agenda itself? Because I think there's a delicate balance. You don't want to get too overly friendly, but in order to understand and get to know your board members on a deeper level, you have to be somewhat of a personal person to understand where they're coming from and asking a little bit deeper questions than, how was your day?
That's a tricky question, and it is a bit of a sticky wicket, isn't it?
Right.
Because, look, I'm going to give a few points, but my own perspective, frankly, of being a former president, CEO, I would say often in my board, you have one employee. It's me. That's it.
Yeah.
It's me. I'm the one that lists, and the proverbial buck stops with me. You're not happy with so-and-so like this, you need to go through me, and I will handle it. And that would be my job, more or less, to be able to relay that, because you don't want to sit in a situation where the executive director or like that is being overmined, whether intentionally or not.
Right.
Now, should there be no rapport, no contact? Probably not. I don't think that's healthy either. And that strikes me, frankly, of a little bit of, honestly, if you've got an executive director, is that on the control freak perspective, my advice to them is, somebody there, is be careful about that. Be careful about how far you do that. Certainly there has to be a degree of that. There has to be like that, but I think play it out. And depending on the situation per se, board directors, I also encourage you to understand that a role, that there should be a friend, in my view, a friendly relationship, but not as close, that you should try to establish with your executive director.
Right. We get a lot of horse blinders on as leaders in the nonprofit world, right? Because we're concentrating on one thing, and it's probably fundraising, or if the programs are a little cattywampus, and we get into board meetings where we forget that those we're dealing with are human beings and they're not a
Yeah.
part of the team too. Any tips and tricks on how we can maintain our relationship composure, even though there's something pressing from the board to do, and not be so business oriented? I mean, I know there's processes and procedures and right, you have to do that, but there's a human element to making some of these broader decisions. And if we forget that while we are having a conversation, I think it goes a little bit away from either mission or personal centric or the reason why these people are on there. Any tips and tricks on how you can, as an executive director, maintain that in the back of your brain that these are people too?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I thought often after what occurred to me is this is where I could have done better in that, because I just my nature of a very efficient and run through the checklist and all like this. Be careful about that. One is really important to take the time where it's needed to invest in those relationships and getting that. I think that proverbial time down in the bar, if you will, after a board meeting like that is actually really, really, really important. More so than if I look back on that is more important than you realize. Taking the time to get to know them, but it's also important, very important, to always try to consistently remind yourself that nobody joins a board because they want to get into the minutia. If they did, that's a red flag, honestly. You don't want people like that. You need to give them the top details, frankly, and keep it on a strategic level. The reason why people will serve on a board, as I said, is be part of something bigger than themselves. But the interesting thing that often asked when a follow-up question I ask them is, what would cause you to leave?
Yeah.
What would cause you to leave? And the interesting thing with most board directors, at least the good ones, is that they're not going to make a big hullabaloo like this. They'll probably just finish up. Either they'll just politely desist and like that, or just not renew their term like this and say thank you. And we'll all never know the real difference behind that.
Right.
They'll say, I feel like my time and talents were not being utilized. Time, talents, and expertise, and my expertise were really being utilized. I wasn't being consulted on these things, the big thing, and I didn't see progress on the mission. Now, the two of those things are really good, important to put together, because if you don't feel like you're investing your time as a expert, and that's primarily what we go towards boards for, we're looking for an advisory type of role. Because you as an executive director, you cannot possibly know everything. No. A smart leader knows, okay, I don't know this and this and this, but you know what? I'm going to go and get the people on my team who do.
Yep.
And I'll get my council of advisors and say, okay, here's the situation. What do we? You need to be really approaching it from that perspective. Don't get into the details and say and ask for that there. I think the most board directors, if they feel that they're regularly consulted, that they're valued, and they're putting forth on that, these inputs are there, you're going to have a much better quote unquote boss. As a result of that.
One of the things that I think is interesting that you brought up is you're almost describing how an HR department would approach an employee. In the sense that a lot of employees probably leave because they didn't feel valued or they didn't feel like their talents were being used correctly. Is there a role, if you're big enough for an organization, if you're a mid-sized group that has an HR director, is there a role for you to think and connect with your HR department about how you are interacting with your donors? Not necessarily to build the process and procedures, but like, hey, what things are we doing to maintain talent within our organization, and how can we apply that maybe to a board member to see what that looks like, to almost engage it that way?
Absolutely. One of our big speakers, Daryl Upsall, is at the summit. Now, if you don't know about who Daryl Upsall is, you need to look him up. Daryl is probably the guy that UN aid agencies go to, UN, Amnesty International at the international level, and say, we need a CEO. Can you help us? This guy's recruited in 62 countries and, in 205 organizations around the world. He goes to Geneva and he puts these people in place there, right? So he's speaking, and he has even said that a number of these bigger organizations will actually go out to the particular effort of saying, we need you to help us build a pipeline of really well-connected people to join our board.
Right.
And as a result of that, they put the time in to get, people like from UN Secretary General, like big names to be able to serve on this, because they know the concept of the fact that if they put that concerted effort in of having the right people around their advisory board, amazing things happen on the fundraising things. Phone calls get answered, and we all know that the best donations are individual donation, gifts and that there. That the greatest ideas and that doors get open for other problems, or these are really critical things, because they're cognizant of the fact that now, admittedly, that's going to be, we're talking Amnesty International is a behemoth in the nonprofit world, but how do you model that on a smaller scale? You nonetheless have to have a really, I said at the very least, the executive director and the board chair need to have a really good relationship, wherein you're at least conscious of this fact.
Yeah.
You're conscious of this fact. Now, one of the things that with one of the organizations I help manage, it's Learning Disabilities Association of Canada, we made a very clear offer and said, look, let's not, in our strategic planning, let's not focus so much on the what. We have to focus first and foremost and put a big emphasis on the who. Who do we really like that? We've got about 9 spots that are available on our board, that are up to in our bylaws and constitution. Do we want to fill them up just with warm bodies? No, we're willing to wait. We want the right people in the right seats as well. And with making a conscious effort of saying, you know what, this is help us build this organization and what its full potential is. I see a lot of great opportunity for that organization. I've seen other opportunities with other organizations that at least become conscious of that. They've created, in this instance, a special committee, a recruitment committee, to be able to really think of that there, to be able to think about that and filling those roles with the right people.
That's interesting. I love that as a perspective, and I think that's really one of the things that again, we don't think about that enough. We don't think about it from a board's perspective. We don't ask them the right questions. We don't. Once they're there, now they're part of the machine, right? So there's no continuous relationship building with that individual because we got them right. We nailed them, and that's really a problem with donors as well. Right? If you get this almost becomes a transactional relationship rather than something that's a little elevated than that, right? If you get a donor and you thank them and you're done, great. You got a board member, you woo them, they're in, you're done. And that's just where you begin, because if you don't start cultivating a better and deeper relationship with them, they're going to walk, they're not going to be invested, they're going to be that warm body that you mentioned as well. If only there was some sort of summit or some sort of event that one could help sort of do this. Talk to me about this, because I'm so curious of putting together a sort of a nonprofit board summit, right? It's something that we don't see a lot.
No, we don't.
At all. It's never concentrated and specifically geared towards board members or the concept of board members. Talk to me about that. How'd you come up with this, and what does that entail?
Yeah, well, it leads back, frankly, to my time when I was going through this exploratory fashion like this. And I think that sometimes we all have our own histories and stories, and we have to go through certain things where I became really aware. I wanted to be really aware of the other side of the coin. I learned, and my own association background, as I said, I think there's no better way to learn than from your colleagues or peers, the content that happens like this. That's why there's associations like the AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals, CSA, Canadian Society of Association Executives, the American counterpart of ASAE, all these kinds of other organizations. There's even corporate board director or associations. So inevitably, when I was trying to learn more of this, I started to think, well, I need to go and talk to where there's going to be this. And I was amazed. I was shocked and awed, Patrick, that there was nothing out there. Nothing out there. I mean, all of these various organizations, they kind of talk about it on the periphery. It's kind of an afterthought and like this. And I said, well, gosh darn it, no wonder we keep on repeating the same darn thing, because nonprofits, we all kind of we operate in our own silos. So if you're a health-related nonprofit or charity, you're going to know maybe other organizations that are similar in your same sphere. But somebody on the board, for example, who's really passionate about that, the chances that they're going to know somebody on an environmental NGO or a chamber of commerce or a trade association, I mean, it's possible. Is it likely? No. And yet, they kept on repeating the same dang thing, maybe on a different issue, but it was a really relatively simple thing.
Right.
And I thought, my God, if only of these board directors, which we set them up with virtually no training. I mean, how do we expect somebody to be a leader with so many fiduciary responsibilities like this? How do we set them up for success when we basically just give them a little bit of the manual with due respect? It's usually filtered through the perspective of an executive director who's, I'm sorry, we have a bit of an agenda that's different, something like this there. How do we expect to really honestly set them up for success and better yet, attract the people who are really, really busy? So try as I might, I couldn't find anything. So I put together an informal group called the Society of Nonprofit Board Directors. We put it out, a call out, if you're a board director, would you like to learn like this? And I was quite surprised back in 2018 or so that people were joining on and on getting this. But along came now COVID. We've seen the importance, frankly, and the opportunity that exists with virtual conferences, virtual events. And I said, gosh darn it, we've been managed to have some success and organically growing a little bit by bit. But now, if anything, is really the time, and I'm to give this opportunity for people around the world. And I'm blessed. I just checked this morning, as of this morning, over 180 registrants from around the world that have registered. Multiple continents. We have speakers that are arranged from Australia, Canada, United States, Spain, England, and they keep on joining on this. So clearly, there's a desire for people who want to be change leaders, who want to make an impact, who want to know the difference too, because it's not easy. Executive directors complain that they don't understand the line. A lot of board directors, they don't want to become a micromanager, but they don't want to be this, but nobody tells them clearly what that looks like.
Right.
So this is going to be a full weekend training where you get the ability to be able to learn about that, to learn about your role, how to be more strategic, right? And also sometimes have those difficult conversations that don't necessarily happen and need to happen. Like, for example, how to be courageous. Our keynote speaker, Margie Worrell, who's experienced on the international stage working with UN agencies and counseling, board leaders and like this, about how to have difficult conversations. You imagine how difficult it is. You simply just want to come in as a volunteer. You're a leader, and now you're confronted with, let's say, a board director who's not necessarily pulling their weight. Maybe you got to give a little bit of guidance or performance manage an executive who probably has more experience than you. Right. All these kinds of things. I challenge executive directors, try to think of it from their perspective. This is not easy either. This is not easy either. So what we've done is we've created this summit, and we're getting a lot of board like this, but we think that, frankly, we're only going to have as much success as if we get the executive directors on board with sending their board members in this.
Yep.
Okay. So if they go to nonprofitboardsummit.org/EDS, so short for executive directors, EDS there, you can learn a lot about how you can get your whole of your board, several board members, and we've even got special pricing packages for all of them to be able to attend. And yes, this is strictly an event just for the boards. Nothing wrong with this, guys. You have your events. You have lots of opportunity for this, like this. But what we happen to come across with the old method, and we're trying to disrupt this a bit about board training and development, is that it's usually incumbent upon a weekend retreat. Weekend facilitator comes in and charges upwards of $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, and the training is either forgotten in 6 months, but because you got a brand new board, you got to rinse and repeat and do the whole darn thing again. And that's assuming, of course, you as an executive director can even get the funding or get the agreement from your board to want to do this. It's a lot better at $47 per person at this point in time. It's going to be scheduled to go up a little bit there per board member, to get them in and get them training, and they can connect with change makers from around the world and bring lessons back about how they can be a much more effective board leader. So it's at nonprofitboardsummit.org/EDS.
I love it. We're going to have those in the show notes as well. So get over there. And again, what a nice treat to have your board too. Hey, we'd like to underwrite this, have you go through it. Here's the trainings. Here's the kind of things you're going to bring back. anything you can do together to kind of grow and understand each other and ask those questions. I think it's a really good growth pattern too. So, and as you said, you can't afford not to at this point. If you're curious about what that is, that's a great investment of time and talent and treasure. And I think if you can wrap your head around why on earth your board members do the things they do and what their background is and what their passion is, you've solved 99% of the problems of your board stuff already. And I think that's really where the perspective of this conversation has been really fun, is that becomes a different way of thinking. And that different way of thinking is going to signal to your board that you're a little more purposeful with why they're there, what they're doing, and how you're going to interact. And that purposefulness will be reflective in how well they work with you, what questions they ask, how engaged they become. And at the end of the day, that's really what you want as a board member anyway, right? You want somebody who asks better questions and is better engaged about that.
The best bosses, and this took me a long time, believe it or not, are actually the most informed ones.
There you go.
The best conversations, the board meetings, I've been through as an executive director where after the end of it, I go to my staff and say, wow, we survived another one. We went through that one. And then I've been on the other conversations where I like mind blown. I'm like, wow, that was a really cool conversation. I feel personally challenged and growth and like that.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that if you can get your board on board with that and going in that direction, tell you something, you're going to enjoy going to work. You're going to look forward to it. You're going to view you don't need to look at your board as at this adversarial type of approach. When sometimes I see this too far often in the blog sphere. It should be a collaborative one that feeds off each other, where you're leveraging each other's expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, absolute pleasure. So glad that you're doing this. So glad that you're bringing this topic up, and really nice meeting you. And it's always nice to meet a fellow Northerner. I think Fargo is like the northernmost thing ever, and I get somebody who's got a better Northern accent than I do. That's a great addition to the official Do Good Better podcast. Mark, thanks so much for being a guest on today.
Thank you.